Hello, everybody. This is Lori Smith on Spreaker, and glad to be here. It's not so happy of a day for me. That's why I titled the show Father's Day. Not so happy, for everybody, right? It's kind of it's a day where many people will be, those who had really loving and decent fathers, will be celebrating that, and those whose fathers who've passed on, and left this earth, they'll be, mourning the loss. And then there's those of us that have fathers that, it just didn't go so well. So I just wanted to be a bit of a voice out here for people who struggle through these days. Like Mother's Day and Father's Day is really hard for me. Um, if I could just push it all under the carpet and pretend that none of that garbage happened, then I could just be like everybody else and just be like, oh, it's great. But I can't live a lie, you know. I just can't do that. Like, it's just, what's done is done. Truth is truth. Reality is reality. I'm in reality. So it's a hard day for a lot of people. I know it's a hard day for me. I've been struggling all day just trying to breathe and relax and breathe and relax, and just flashbacks running through my mind. My mom was my main abuser, but my dad also was very abusive, and my dad was abusive to my mother, to my brothers, to my sisters, to me, and to all of us, right? And so just the garbage that I watched through the years, the abuse started before I was born, long before I was born, and then I was born into this hellhole, and was forced to just deal with it, and in dealing with it, I obviously didn't deal with it all that well. I don't know who does. I don't know who could, but this day frustrates me. For most people, it's a great day, and I see stuff on Facebook all day, oh, happy Father's Day, and I'm real happy for those people, that have those great relationships with their fathers, because I think that's wonderful, and I think that's what we need. That's what life should be about, is having these great relationships with your parents, and parents having these great relationships with you, and with their children, right? And as they grow up through the years, just this respect and this honor and this decency, and this caring. And then I think about my own parents. I think about my father. It was Father's Day, so we'll talk about my dad. And I just remember all the stuff that he did. I remember all the stuff that my mom suffered at his hands, and my brothers and myself. And mainly it's my brothers and my mom that, the main abuse from my dad. And a little bit from me, but mostly it was just watching him, trash my mom or trash my brothers. And I only have two siblings living now out of, there were 7 of us. There would have been 10, but 3 of them died stillborn, so 7 children. So 2 of my older siblings, that's all we got, plus my dad. That's it. The family's pretty well toast. And so my 2 siblings that are still living support my abuser dad. Not financially. I mean, he lives in a senior's place. He's mentally ill, and he's 90 years old. He's really old. And so he's doing quite well for himself. He's being looked after, being cared for, right? And I think about the garbage that he put us through. I mean, I'm happy he's being looked after. I mean, that's great. I don't wish I don't wish people to suffer, right? I really don't. Not even those who hurt me, right? But the issue is that I can't have a relationship with him, period. I mean, not on any level. He's mentally ill, and me and him didn't see eye to eye or get along since I was born. So it's not ever going to be reconciled, not here on this earth. And so I know that I'm not the only one. There's so many people out there in this situation. There's so many people who've had dads that have walked out on him and left the family. And I used to think, when I was growing up, I thought, well, at least he didn't leave us, because that's what some people in my family would say. And I sort of grew up hearing that especially my mom. My mom would be like, well, at least your father didn't just leave us or whatever, because my mom would have to look after these 5 kids in the home. The other 2 had already left, moved out, the oldest. And then years later, I heard some of my older siblings saying, yeah, he should have left, right? Because the issue is that my parents were fighting all the time, and because they were fighting, it just spread down to us, And because my mother hated my dad, because my dad was always like abusing her really in every way, including marital rape. She just hated him, and he wasn't treating her right at all, ever. And so my older brothers would try to keep my dad away from her, and then they'd get beat up. You know, it was just a steady cycle, and it just went on like I lived this my whole life, right? It didn't start like when I was 10, or it didn't start when I was 12, or start when I was 14. This was what I grew up in from day one, right? So it's just it's such a drag, you know, that I mean, I understand why my sister and my brother, you know, are in denial and don't want to deal with this. I'm the only one that's actually dealing with this. Everybody else is in denial, pretending that it was all so great, you know. And I'm just like, you know, I can't do that because that's a lie, right? It was always a lie, and it's just absolutely ridiculous that people, I guess it's, I don't know, it must be easier, obviously, right? But it'll kick them in the ass eventually, right? But the thing is like, how can you support an abuser like that raped your mother? I don't care if it's my dad or not. Women have the right to their own bodies, and I'm not on here to talk about women's lib and all this stuff. I'm just talking about my parents. And you know, my mom, like, she couldn't have any more children. When she had me, like, 2 babies before me died stillborn, and then when she got pregnant with me, because my dad raped her, there you go, rape child, right? She didn't want me. She didn't want any more kids, right? And the 2 before me died, and then I came along and they saved me because they took me out early by C-section because my mom went into a coma. She was real sick, and she wasn't supposed to have any children after my brother, so he's 7 years older than me. And so, you know, she hated my dad, right? Because he was always raping her, right? Forcing her to have sex. And so this show is definitely not for children, so just so everybody knows, 18 and over, please. So, you know, I got 2 siblings who, you know, my sister's in denial. She's always been in denial, right? She's, what do you want to call that? I forget the term, but she doesn't deal with it at all, right? She pretends everything was just great, right? And my brother used to say that he would kill my dad. As a matter of fact, my brother didn't go to my mom's funeral because he swore up and down that if he went to my mom's funeral, he would kill my dad because my dad was still alive, right? And but you know, the 2 of them sit there and back him up now, you know. And I mean, you know, a few years back, I was talking to my sister, and I was like, you know, like, you know that dad raped mom. You just know it, right? You lived in the same house that I did. We all grew up in the same home. And she's just like, well, you know, that was just, you know, that's not really all his fault. And I'm just like, oh my God, you're going to sit here and back up a marital rapist? I mean, I don't care if he was her husband or not. He was literally forcing and raping my mother. And he did that in front of me, so, when I was a young girl. So, violent rape. My mother was pushing him and screaming to get away from him, and he was violently raping her right in front of me, right? So this is how I grew up. So great, lovely, happy Father's Day. Yeah, thanks, Dad. And so it's real frustrating that people support abusers, right? And yet they will not help the other people in the family that were abused. See, my family should all be really, to be honest with you, rallying around me and saying, you know what, my God, you know, I mean, this should have never happened. You were the youngest, you were the baby. Like, I mean, they've said stuff like that before, but they don't rally around me. I mean, a few comments have been made here and there. But, you know, there was no protection for me. There was no protection for my mother except for my brothers. And when my brothers moved out, well, when I was 4 years old, just a quick little story, one of my brothers was going to prison for forging a check, so he had to go to prison. So, you know, non-violent crime, but he had to go to do some prison time. And so he went to prison for a while, but before he went to prison, the day he was leaving to go, he told me, he says, look after mom, you have to protect mom. I was like 4 years old. I remember this conversation, right? And it was one of the last conversations that I remember having with him. There's a couple more where he was torturing my Barbies and stuff like that when he got out of prison, but before that, you know, he was telling me, look, you got to look after mom. You got to behave yourself, because my mother was already abusing me, and he was worried because he was the only brother that used to protect me, right? He used to save me from my dad and from my mom when he wasn't in prison. And so he didn't live that long after that. When I was 7 years old, he was murdered. But that stuck in my mind that I needed to protect my mom, you know, and Like, I knew what she was going through. I could see the torture and the pain going on between her and my dad, and I could see what he had done to her, like, since they had been married. Like, she was broken down. She was a victim for sure. And the issue is that she was abused as a child and got into this abusive marriage. I talk a whole lot about this on Blog Talk Radio, Laurie Smith on Blog Talk Radio, if anybody's interested. I did like 900 shows. But, this is just a short show here tonight talking about Father's Day and why it just grieves me to have to deal with it. But, and I don't drink, so I can't get loaded and just wipe it off, right? I mean, I have to deal with it. And so, it's harsh, right? It's so harsh because people will back up my abuser father. And the issue is that there's all these other people, like my nephew, for instance. Well, I mean, I can see why my nephew loves his grandfather. My parents were actually good to their grandchildren. They loved their grandchildren. They hated their own children. But my sister had two boys, and my nephews, who were pretty close in age to me, my oldest sister, she left the house early because of the abuse and stuff. My dad was like ripping her clothes off out in the street and beating on her and calling her a whore and stuff out in the street, in the middle of the street, in front of her friends and stuff. He was horrible. So she got married and moved out at a young age, like 17, and she had kids right away. And so her kids were my age, right? Like, she was pregnant at the same time my mom was pregnant with me. So my nephews are really my age. And so my nephews they were hanging around periodically throughout the years. My parents were good to them, but they were not good to their own children, right? And so my nephews were used to seeing dysfunction because my sister was also abusive and she was abusing them as well. Maybe not in the same way my parents abused us, but she didn't show them much love because my sister was the oldest and she grew up in the same home I did. So she didn't know how to raise kids and she didn't want kids. She just had them, and then she didn't really want them. But she brought them up the best she could with her husband, and they were quite abusive, but they managed to not kill their children, so that's cool. And so they treated them better than we were treated, I'll tell you that. And I think they actually really loved them, which my parents didn't really love us, so there you go, there's a huge difference there. But my sister didn't know how to show it, because we grew up in this home where love wasn't shown. Like, there was no love, period. I mean, it wasn't love. It wasn't like, oh, I just love my kids, I love my children, I love my family. There was none of that. Like, we never ever heard a kind word come out of our parents' mouth, really, because when we were in the house and they were in the house together, all they were doing was fighting and calling each other names and throwing things at each other and busting dishes and breaking furniture and busting things and busting us and busting each other, right? So it was just great. Yeah, lovely. And so this is what people go through, This is why I speak out against this stuff, because I have for some reason the desire to do it, you know what I mean? And I'm able to. So, but it just bugs me that people will back up abusers. There's people like my nephew's friends, through the years that were growing up. Some of my nephew's friends got to know my parents just because of the closeness of these people, these friends of my nephews who would hang around with my nephews all the time, and they kind of got to know my parents as grandma and grandpa, right? And they loved them, they just loved them. And of course my parents treated them really well. They didn't call them whores, and they didn't call them names and tell them to go to hell and beat on them. Of course they're not going to beat on their grandchildren's friends, right? My parents beat on us and called us names and cursed us to hell and threw us out of the house, but they didn't do that to my, you know what I mean? They didn't do that to the grandchildren. They treated the grandchildren really well. So there's people in my family that just back him up and think he's just great, think he's just wonderful. And they know a little bit about the violence between my parents because they saw some of the aftermath of that, but they didn't see the year after year, day after day abuse that went on for years and years and years, And so that's why it's tough, because these people back up my abuser dad, And it's like, well, I guess I can see why, because they don't know. They weren't there, they didn't see it. But I did, And I mean, I used to try to protect my mom. And the issue is my brothers did too. Of course, I was talking about that earlier, and they used to get beat on for it, And I used to watch this, right? And then I'd be screaming at my dad, don't hit my brothers, don't beat up on my brothers, don't beat up on my mom. And then I'd get beat up, right? So my dad, he was a Christian, right? And he used to come home from church, and like Sunday was just hell at our house, and I hated Sundays, and I still do, And that's really sad, but it stayed with me because I lived it every Sunday from the time I was born all the way through until, really until I pretty much started to not go home, right? Which was, I don't know, 13, 12, 13. Just started hanging around other people's houses. Anybody whose parents who would let me stay at their house, I was there, man. I was like, thanks, I'm moving in. And, sometimes I could stay for weeks, at certain friends of mine's homes. And it was great. I'd get some peace. I'd get some, so first of all, some care, some concern, some type of love in a way that these people weren't my parents, but they were kind to me, and they treated me very nice while I was at their home, and it was the closest thing to, a normal family situation that I would ever get. And so, whenever I got the opportunity to just disappear for a while and stay at some friends' homes, I mean, I'd be gone. And two friends in particular. And their parents were just really good and really decent and really loving, and, that's what I was talking about on one of the last shows that I did. They just said the right things to me, that years later I didn't realize at the time really, really stuck and really helped me out. But I still have to deal with this because my dad is still alive, and even when he goes, there won't be any real peace. My mother passed away years ago, 17 years ago now, and she's gone almost 20 years, and there's no peace with that. There's no peace on the inside of me from that. There's a peace because I'm a Christian, right? And I believe, I'm not going to get into that here on this show, but my belief is really strong. My faith is really strong. Obviously, that's why I'm here and I haven't killed myself, right? And I just keep going. But the thing, because I know that's what God wants me to do, because He told me. And because I was going to kill myself. I had a voice saying, "Why? Why are you doing this?" It wasn't mine. It was something was talking to me. Somebody was talking to me, and I believe it was God, right? And so, God wants me here for a reason. He said, "You will help my children." That's what I felt in my spirit, And because He knows that I've been in hell, I've been there. I know what it's like, And it's tough. It's hard, for so many people. So many people turn to drugs and alcohol and whatever, trying to cope. I smoke cigarettes. That's what I do, And I can't seem to stop because I'm still in the middle of this, this phase of insecurity. Even though I say, okay, I'm healed. I feel good. I've gotten over the child sexual abuse that I suffered. I got over that pretty well. It's still with me. I still have the memories. I still have the visual flashbacks, of being sexually abused and raped and sodomized. I still know what that feels like. I still know the pain of that. I still know what it's like to be so sick for so long afterwards because of the infection that ensued because of it, and sitting in the bathtub just crying, like my own blood. This is horrible, right? This is the garbage that I went through, and nobody cared. And the sad thing is, nobody cares. I got a couple of good friends that care, and that's really awesome, man. That's really all I need, to be honest with you. And I got God, and I know God cares. But I got, so I got a few friends who understand where I've been, and are willing to at least try, And I have a number of people on Facebook who support me on a regular basis, and these are my friends, And I got a couple of friends who will spend day after day with me to make sure I'm okay, calling me or keeping in touch with me every day to make sure I'm alright. Now that's awesome because my own family doesn't give a shit, and talking about Father's Day, 2 years later, like I haven't talked to my dad for 2 years, pretty much, because I told him, I said, I'm living in reality, you're living a lie, you want me to just forget and forgive and forget all this garbage, and I can't do that. I can't live a lie, because you won't own up to it. He wouldn't own up to it. He still won't. He blames it on the devil. He blames it on, it was the times. That's why he beat on my brothers and hurt my mom, because it was the times. It was the 60s. It was the 70s. That's what he says. It was the 80s. I said, what was it? The 60s, the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. You can't blame it on the decades. It's like, no, he's an asshole, and he hurt his family, but he doesn't want to admit it. Because he was abused, and he doesn't want to, he loves his parents so much, even though they abused him and his siblings, and there was some sexual abuse going on there too. He's screwed in his head, and he's mentally ill. That doesn't help, psychologically ill, And he was diagnosed psychologically ill when they were brought up on charges. Both my parents were hauled into court for child abuse charges, right? And so, he doesn't want to admit it, right? And that's what I need from him. I need for him to show me true remorse and true, sorrow for what he did. But he doesn't. He won't ever do that because he won't take responsibility for it. And so, we're done. Like I told him a couple of years ago, I said, we're just done. I will have nothing to do with you, you know. And I can't live that lie that you and my sister and my brother are living, you know. That, oh, it's okay and everything's fine, and Dad didn't rape Mom, and he didn't kick the crap out of my brothers and cause them to want to kill themselves, and he didn't, like, ogle and molest and sexually kind of abuse us, and sexually abuse outright my mother by raping her, and, that he wasn't so highly abusive all the time. And my mother was just fighting back, right? I mean, that's all she was doing. My dad, the reason that my mother used to bash him in the head with things was because she was fighting back. She finally got to the point where she was like, you know what, you bastard, you're not going to win, because I will kill you. And that's what she would say. She'd be like, you touch me again and I will kill you, and he would still do it, and they would fight and bust things and trash the house and stuff. And they taught us how to do that. They taught us how to be insane, and then two of my brothers couldn't hold a life together and ended up killing themselves. One of my brothers did okay, but he moved out when he was 16 and he's still screwed up. I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't even say he's all that well, you know what I mean, like mentally well. And, it just ruined a whole family, right? That's why I do a whole lot of talking about, family violence prevention, child abuse prevention, and stuff like this, because, I want people to realize, like, man, this is not right. It's not right for a child to wake up, in the middle of the night in fear, wondering, who's going to be killed, whether it's them or somebody else in the family. Right, by somebody, whether it's the dad or the mom or the brothers or whoever. Like, this is absolutely unreal. This violence passed down to us. And so my brother was violent. And he threatened to kill my sister with a knife, had a knife to her throat and everything, and was going to kill her if she didn't take him on a drug run to rob a pharmacy, which she ended up doing. And he got busted, and he did some time. My sister didn't get in trouble, but the thing is that nothing was done. My mother actually told me to try to talk my brother out of killing my sister. My mom wouldn't do anything because she didn't want to get involved. So she had me. She said, you do it. He'll listen to you. You do it. So my mom was always getting me to talk all the psychotic people in the family down who were on drugs, because my mom didn't want to deal with it, right? So this is the insanity that goes on within families that don't get help, and this is why I keep talking and I keep talking and I keep talking about this stuff, because it's insane. Never should have happened. And this is what kids are going through. And you see these people out here and you think, oh, what's the matter with them? And it's like, well, man, you don't even want to probably know what they've been through. Like, it's disturbing. It's disgusting. I mean, like, when my mom was had surgery when I was 9, and she wasn't expected to make it, really. And my dad was harassing her. And she was so sick, the doctors actually told me and my sister, who was 5 years older than me, so my sister would have been just turned 14, I just turned 9, to watch my mother and make sure that nobody bothered her, right? Because she couldn't stay in the hospital. We didn't have any money, so we were flat broke. So they sent her home, right, too early. So my mom was very, very sick, and so we were kind of watching my mom to make sure my dad wouldn't go in there and bother her. But he did one night. He snuck in there and he started bothering her. My mom was crying, and she was really calling for help. She was just like, get out, get out. And so I got mad. I was like 9 years old, and I took my, it was plastic, but it doesn't really matter. It was my pink plastic jumbo bat in the bedroom, and I walked up behind my dad really quiet. And I smashed him as hard as I could in the head with that bat. And, I mean, I knocked his glasses off. And, I'm sure it hurt. But the thing is if it was wood, it would have really done some damage. But the thing is, it was plastic. But he did some damage to me. Instead of calming me down and then holding me and saying, because if he was really truly not doing anything to my mother and he wasn't hurting her, and he was a good man and he was a good father, then he would have got the bat away from me, and he would have sat me down for a minute, calmed me down, and then said, daughter, like, you can't hit people in the head with bats. I love you. What's the matter? What's going on? But no, instead of that, he threw me as hard as he could across the room into a wall damaging my back to this day. I have no feeling up in my upper spine by my neck because the nerves are toast. And my neck is screwed, so I drop things. If I turn my head to the left, I can't hold anything in my hands. So, yeah, I mean, serious damage, is like, and then proceeded to beat the shit out of me and kick me, I was like 9 years old. He's going to take on a 9-year-old kid. So then my attitude was F you. I won't cuss too much on the show here. But that was my attitude towards him after that. I was like, F you. And I would tell him to his face, I'd be like, I hate you. I hate your guts. Right to his face. And I didn't care. He would slap me around. He would hit me in the face with a belt. He would punch me to the ground and beat me with his belt and stuff. I didn't care. I was like, whatever. But I hate you anyway. And you can beat me all you want. That ain't going to change anything because I see you. I see you for who you are. I mean, my whole life, like he used to call me the seed of the devil, demon seed, because he said I wasn't his child. Right, right. He said none of us were his kids actually. My dad's mentally ill, right? And so my dad said that none of these children that were supposedly his were his. That my mother was this whore and she was a harlot. She was out sleeping with everybody, the neighbor, the milkman, the postman, and all this. I was supposedly like the postman's child. My mom was like, I wish they were somebody else's children. Sadly enough, they're yours, you bastard. And so this was it's really sick and twisted situation. And it's incredibly wrong. If you know of a family that's struggling, I mean, my God, it's real hard to get your foot in there to help these kids. It's hard to find help for these kids because there is no help for these kids. If they end up in the system, they end up abused anyway half the time. Half the time they're not removed from the home. That was our case. We had social workers around, checking us out, making me take my clothes off, so they could check for bruises and signs of abuse, right? Didn't do any good, right? There's no help for these kids out here. But, if you have kids, you treat them right. Make sure that you treat them properly, raise them up properly so that they'll respect you and they'll respect themselves. And then when they have children, they will bring their children up, and honor their children and be good to their children and love their children, right? Well, take good care, everybody. Yeah, we'll talk to you again soon.
Comforting